Welcome to the Alcohol Addiction Podcast. I'm, of course, your host, Lee Davey, and today I have a very special guest, Susan Peirce Thompson. How are you doing today, Susan?
I'm good, Lee. How are you?
I'm absolutely fantabby-dozy. I learned about you pushing my 11-week-old in a pram through this beautiful park, listening to the James Healy podcast. Let's get that right, because I always confuse James Healy with James Clear. The James Healy podcast, and it was a really apt moment for me to listen to it because there are two reasons people find me on the internet. One is because they want to give up drinking alcohol, and the other one is because they want to quit sugar. And
Really?
yeah, and I heard you talking about that, and I thought this is just a perfect moment because I actually had a few members of my community really struggling to quit sugar, and I have to say, listening to it, it was. I learned a lot. I thought it was great, and I'll be buying your book and figuring out more about it. But that's why I asked you onto the show. So we'll get onto the sugar in a minute. But I want to start by asking you about your own struggles with weight loss, because we all go through these diets, right? Everybody goes through 100 diets before they finally crack it. And I'm interested in how you finally cracked it. Tell us a little bit about your backstory.
Yeah, sure. And just for the record, most people don't ever crack it.
Right, yeah, it's
This
true. Yeah.
has, weight loss has an abysmal success rate. I mean, 1% maybe. My story is probably not that different than yours. I'm just a junkie. So alcohol, drugs. That was my story when I was in my teens. I got sober when I was 20. Gosh, I've been sober now for 22 and a half years. But, for me, I drank and used for lots of reasons, but one of them was to control my weight. And the drugs that I did in particular, things like crystal meth and crack cocaine, cocaine before I found crack cocaine, they were fabulous at helping me not want to eat, not have to worry about food, not have to worry about controlling my weight. Because already at the age of 14, well, I think at the age of 12, I weighed more than I weigh right now. So,
Right.
I had a weight problem, and nothing seemed to help, and drugs helped, but then, that went bad.
As
This
it
is
does.
as it does, not a good long-term solution for anything. But it's funny. I was so excited to be thin that, like, when I was doing crystal meth, I didn't care that I was psychotic. I mean, I
Mm.
was 17. I'd never been thin before, after puberty. And, I was so excited to be in a slender body that I was, kind of in denial about the fact that I was having hallucinations and delusions, and, was dropping out of school. And, I just couldn't get over the fact that I could wear, right size clothes, cute little clothes, and look the way I wanted to look.
Mm.
So it's really powerful how intense that drive to live in a right sized body, if you don't, can be. So anyway, I got clean and sober when I was 20, and then I just socked on a ton of weight. I knew I would. I knew I would get fat the moment that I put down the drug, and I did. I got fat really fast. And
Can I stop you there?
yeah,
I'll do this from time to time when a thought comes to me, but it is
please.
relevant. It
Oh,
is. It is relevant. Do you think that people identify themselves as very early on as a particular way, a particular being? So when you said there, for example, I knew when I was going to quit drinking that I was going to become fat. Did you at an early age tell yourself that you was a fat person? So like almost like in your mind you were like thinking to yourself, I really need to be careful here or I will like utterly balloon.
um, so it's interesting. Yes, and no. So I think I always thought that I was a slender person who
Hmm.
had this bizarre issue with being fat that didn't fit me.
Right.
So my identity was as a thin person. So
Huh.
like I would be overweight, and I would catch a glance of myself in the shop window, as one does, walking in the mall or something, and you see your reflection, and I would be shocked every time.
Yeah,
Like,
yeah.
oh my God, I'm so big. I could never quite. I was like, or the security cameras in the store, and then you see yourself, and I was like, oh, I look atrocious. I was huge. So my image of myself was as a thin person, but I did have the narrative that you're talking about. Like, for example, when I was 14 or 15 or 16 or 20 or 22 years old, like I knew that whenever I started having kids, it was going to be lights out, that I was going to be one of those people who gained, 60, like 30 kilos, 60 pounds, whatever, with a pregnancy and never, and then gained, 50 kilos with the next pregnancy and never lost it. I never got over 200 pounds, but that's because I found the way that I manage my weight now when I was 20 years old. But I was headed there. I was obese already. So anyway, does that answer your question?
Yeah, no, I ask it because it's really interesting because you will get a lot of people using the excuse that they're going to get fat to stop themselves from quitting alcohol, or one of the major ones is quitting smoking. So many people believe they're going to put on weight if they quit smoking. It's almost like, I know a lot of the times it's an excuse. The addiction is taken over, and this belief that we're going to get fat is just one of these excuses we make to keep us addicted. However, it really does set some people up for failure, and in a way, kind of gives you like free license to go and eat a lot of donuts, right? It's almost like I'm going to be this way, so I'm just going to behave this way, and I see it a lot, and it's quite damaging, I thought it was just something worth raising.
Yeah, I think there's some truth in that, and I think there's some not truth in that. So for example, let's take the person who needs to quit smoking, and they're like, yeah, gain weight. They probably will, though. That's the thing. I mean, so it is true that when you stop smoking, the only thing that's available on anything like the kind of regularity and schedule that cigarettes are available to ease and soothe the addicted brain is food. I mean, like, the reality is that someone who stops smoking is a sitting duck for gaining weight. And I hear you that having that image in your mind does absolutely, lead you on the first step down that path. I hear you. And at the same time, I think being forewarned or sort of forearmed about what's maybe coming isn't necessarily a bad thing. Like, like I was kind of already hunting for a solution after I got clean and sober. Like I knew I was going to get fat, so I had to already start looking for a solution. Like I just kind of knew how my brain was going to turn against me, and I was right, So anyway, it's a tough one. It's a tough one.
I can see how it helps. I can see how it can be positive because for you yourself, you've said, look, I know it's almost like risk management, like relapse prevention. I know that I'm going to be fat, thereby I can put in action plans to prevent that from happening. I can also see a lot of people using it as an excuse just to be fat. It's like when I'm on this podcast, I'm always like this with my pen, right? It's just a habit of mine. It's developed into a habit of mine. Now I could put that pen down and try to do something else, but I don't have to put a donut into my mouth, right? And I know when I was listening to your podcast, this is an area where we differ slightly, I think, and it would be really interesting to learn more about your views on this. But when I gave up drinking and when I gave up smoking, I had zero withdrawal symptoms and zero cravings. The way that I did it was to learn that I was thinking about the problem incorrectly and illogically, and I changed my thinking, and as a result of that, I never had any of these cravings. So because that happened to me, my own personal experience, I have to be really careful about my bias with other people, that when they tell me I'm going to quit smoking and I know I'm going to put weight on, my instant reaction is, no, you don't have to put weight on, just choose not to eat the donut and stick a pen in your mouth. Because that didn't work for me. Yet I know you're more about the neuroscience and the brain is working out a way of getting you to be fat, if that makes sense.
Yeah. And, Lee, was that your first time trying to quit drinking?
It was my first time to quit. It was my first time to try to quit drinking, but it definitely wasn't my first time to quit smoking.
Uh-huh.
I must have tried to give up smoking 100 times, all just based on pure willpower. And then I read Alan Carr's Easy Way to Quit Smoking Permanently. And when I finished the last page, for 16 years, I've never craved a single cigarette.
I'm curious about that. What
You're
made
curious. It absolutely baffles me because it's in the top 5 most addictive substances in the world. And sometimes I just want to go under the knife for someone like to have a look at my brain and figure out what went on. I just learned that nicotine offered me 0 value and alcohol offered me 0 value. And once I learned that and accepted that and created a conviction around that, I had no desire to drink or smoke. Which is not the same as sugar, Susan. I struggled with sugar because there was value in sugar because it tasted nice. And I couldn't get around that. That was my difficulty in sugar.
Yeah, I mean, I just feel like I've been pinned under the boulder of addiction, just powerless, like every cell in my being wanting to not go down that pathway of abusing myself with a substance, with a man, with a bowl of cookie dough, with whatever it was, and like unable to stop, like watching my highest self watching me act in ways that are completely, obviously, flagrantly against my best interests, not want to. I've eaten with tears streaming down my face. I went from a size 4 to a size 24 in 3 months. Like, I guess I just have a lot of compassion for someone who is feeling the powerlessness of their addiction. Like sometimes the addiction is just really, really strong. And, the kind of like, just, the logic that you're talking about, I haven't personally found that to be that helpful for me. Knowing better is like, yeah, I'm a smart cookie. Like I know all kinds of things and I will, I'll put that crack pipe to my mouth anyway. I don't know. So, yeah, I guess, it's interesting to hear you talk because I've actually, my background is in 12-step programs and we don't talk in those rooms much about the kind of sort of pull yourself up by your bootstraps, logical, just look at this, look at the reality of it and realize it's not providing you any value type of approach. I've actually never met anybody who's had any success with an addiction from that kind of approach. So it's kind of neat to talk to you.
Yeah, I think it is it's great to have 2 people with 2 different perspectives talking about this because I know my audience is heavily skewed to my way of thinking, but I know that there are also a lot of people who are great believers in the 12-step program, believe that alcohol addiction is a brain disease and believe that they're going to be addicted for the rest of their life and they're only one kind of lapse away from hell. And the way that in the beginning, I was very dogmatic about my approach and very critical about the dogmatic approach of AA and then realized that I was a complete hypocrite. So now I try to keep more of an open mind and my mantra is if whatever works for you works, you know what I mean? So I think there are, you're right. The way that it worked for me doesn't work for everybody. And I believe what I'm learning through literature and my interactions with people who come into my kind of sphere of influence is there are some people that are just really, really resistant to change. And they're the people who you have to be very skilled, way out of my league, to be able to help them. And then there are a large group of people who are not as resilient to change, who are more open-minded and more accepting and more, come on, let's sort this shit out kind of attitude. And they're the ones that I kind of find I'm easier to help with. And right now, my education and my training is all geared up to help me acquire the skills to help the people who are more resistant to change. That's what I'm working on at the moment. And David Burns, the author of Feeling Good, is the person I've been reading a lot of at the moment, and I'm going to take on some of his training courses. So
nice. So interesting. I can feel the difference in our philosophies coming up even in the way we talk. When you say these people who are resistant to change, I like part of my skin starts to get agitated. Like I'm like, they're not resistant to change. They're just in the grip, like they would change if they could, maybe, I mean, there are people who are resistant to change. Don't get me wrong. So maybe you're talking about those people, but there's people who are resistant to change. There's people who are just wanting to change but can't. Like they're just pinned down.
I think there is what I'm learning from David Burns, and he could be right, he could be wrong. What I like about David Burns is he's very research orientated, very into feedback, very into creating wide, large-ranging studies. And he talks about what you just spoke about the very emotive subject of talking about addiction in terms of this person is resistant to change. He understands and talks very openly about how emotive it is, how it will get people's backs up, how people will be like, you fucking kidding me? Do you think I want to smoke crack? Do you think I want to lose my children? And he understands that, but he still is a great believer that the research is showing him that deep in there somewhere, there is something preventing that person from changing. And then someone like myself, I don't have that. I'm able to adapt more to what he's trying to teach me to change. And I imagine if I was somebody who'd gone through the 12-step program and that worked for me, and I believed that alcohol addiction was a brain disease, I would not believe what David Burns is saying, and I would be angry about that. I think, though, that people who follow that route and it works for them, like myself, great. Mm-hmm. People like yourself who follow the 12-step program and it works for you, great. In a way, it's great because you're capturing more of a broader range of people, Yeah.
So, do you not believe that any addictions are a disease in the brain? Do you not believe that crack addiction or heroin addiction or alcohol addiction, you don't believe? I'm kind of curious what you think is going on in the brain.
I haven't done that much study into that area. I haven't, so I retain a very open mind. So my opinion on those things, I withhold judgment on because I've never been involved in them. Alan Carr did say in his book, though, that he would take up heroin just to prove that he could quit heroin because he believes that it's all in the mind. That was Alan Carr saying that. He never did, though. Poor man died of cancer before he got a chance to do it. But the problem I have with recreational drugs. So my drug use was largely amphetamines, LSD, but largely amphetamines, right? I really enjoyed taking amphetamines. I really enjoyed it. There was something, it gave me a buzz. I was in my kitchen yesterday listening to old rave tunes and my jaw started going and I started to think of drugs. So for me to say that drugs has no value is very difficult for me. But I can wholeheartedly say alcohol has no value. I can wholeheartedly say cigarettes has no value. Can I say heroin has no value? I don't think so, because I believe it does something to someone and takes them somewhere. Amphetamines made me feel better. But I will fight my corner in a debate when somebody's telling me that alcohol is making them feel good. Yeah. Or someone tells me, wow, I really enjoyed that cigarette. I don't believe those things personally, but I don't really have a view on heroin, crack cocaine, things like that, because I've never really experienced it myself.
Well, I mean, do you want to know what happens in the brain and why I think it makes sense to call these things a disease in the brain?
Yeah, sure. And I'm sure there'll be hundreds of people listening to this who really, really want to understand that as well.
So, I mean, the basic system that's in play here is the dopaminergic reward system. That's the nucleus accumbens, the ventral tegmental area. It's sort of deep in the brain. You can't point to it, right? But it's, deep in the brain. Mm. And so when, this system evolved to motivate our behavior, to make us, willing to go out in a snowstorm, to get food, to seek a mate. Mm-hmm. So sex, food, these are the types of things that stimulate those neurons, and they release dopamine. And so it turns out that drugs sort of hijack that system. And what they do is they flood the nucleus accumbens with excessive amounts of dopamine. So natural things tend not to do this, like sex with your spouse or, eating coca leaves straight off the bush in Colombia. But when you take those naturally occurring substances and then you adulterate them, you refine and purify them somehow. Like you take the coca leaf, you refine and purify it into a fine white powder. Now you have cocaine. You take sex and you just extract the most graphic elements and you throw it on demand, available on the internet in terms of just graphic pornography. Now you're hitting the brain with levels of stimulation that it just never evolved to handle. Yeah. You're flooding the brain with way too much dopamine. And those neurons in the nucleus accumbens, they recognize that flood as being excessive. And they say, whoa, we don't need that much stimulation around here. If you keep doing that, that part of the brain responds and it rewires by thinning out those dopamine receptors. It makes them less responsive. It makes them less numerous, which is great because now when you're flooding the brain with dopamine, you're actually getting an appropriate level of response to that stimulation. The trouble is now you've rewired the brain, and if you take away that grotesque stimulation, you now are in a state of dopamine depletion. And what that feels like is it feels needy, it feels itchy, it feels not okay. It sort of feels like an animal that's got its leg trapped in a hunter's vice, and it's going to chew off its leg to go get free. Like it's just, it's like it's gotta escape. It's gotta go get something. It feels bleak. Also, it feels like the world is just not enough. Like there's no color, and it needs that flood. And so this is why when people quit drinking, they often turn to sugar, because if you're not going to get that flood from alcohol, you can just as easily get it from sugar. The cues that you've gotten accustomed to responding to in your environment, whether it's a bar or a liquor store or whatever, those cues in your environment used to lead you to get your dopamine flood from alcohol. But if you cut off that pathway and you don't allow yourself to do that anymore, your brain's going to hunt around for the nearest dopamine fix. And whether it's some pornography or a big fat donut or a pot of coffee or a pack of cigarettes, whatever it is, the brain is not that picky. It will take it from anywhere.
When I think about dopamine receptors, I get this image of a load of like squawking chicks in a nest going wah wah wah, begging for their mom to come along and give them the food, And I think you're right. I think when I was able to quit drinking alcohol by learning that there was no value in alcohol. Okay. However, it is without doubt that as soon as I gave up drinking alcohol, my sugar intake increased. Mm-hmm. And the way that started out was I would still go out for a meal with friends and stuff, but because I wasn't drinking alcohol anymore, I would tell myself that my treat was the sugar. So my treat was going to be my dessert. So I would go into the restaurant, Susan, and have a dessert for a starter, a main meal, and a dessert for my dessert. And I honestly thought it was me making a choice to do that because I wanted to treat myself. What you're saying is that's actually a chemical reaction going on in my brain, whereby my dopamine receptors are saying, okay, Lee, you've been giving me alcohol for 35 years. You're not giving it to me anymore. Can you go and get some sugar or some pornography or some drugs or whatever? And for me, because I had come out of alcohol addiction with a kind of a straight edge kind of mentality, sugar seemed bizarrely, because to me it's the most ridiculous poison in the world. At the time, I just thought it was just normal. Yeah, that's what I'm saying. And so I don't know if it's the word disease that you object to. I mean, a disease, to my understanding, is just when we identify that there's some sort of organ or tissue or system in the body or the brain that is behaving in maladaptive, unhelpful ways for a predictable reason, like that tissue or organ or set of cells has been co-opted to act in a way that's against the organism's highest health and best interest.
for a particular reason. And that's exactly what's going on with addiction. I mean, you don't have to call it a disease or whatever, but there is a place that we can point to in the brain. We can scan it. We can look with PET scans, with fMRI scans at the dopamine depletion and the nucleus accumbens. And that reality causes Homo sapiens to act against their best interest in very predictable ways, in the same way that a cancer cluster or, dopamine issues in Parkinson's disease or whatever, they cause, behavioral issues or whatever. It's a set of behavioral issues that are caused by a certain condition in a cluster of cells or a tissue or an organ in the body or the brain. So I don't have any issue calling alcoholism or drug addiction or sugar addiction a disease in the brain. Like, it seems like actually a pretty straightforward description of what's happening.
I don't have an objection about calling it a disease. I don't have objections about 12 steps. I don't have objection about people putting in the really solid hard work like yourself to understand the neuroscience. Recently I had Maya Salovich on the podcast, and after reading her book Unbroken Brain, what became apparent to me is addiction is far more wide-ranging than a brain disease or a mind issue. It is a huge array of different issues, chemically, psychologically, environmentally, and that really helped me to drop my biases and because I had this real issue, Susan, and it still comes out in me a lot sometimes, whereby this word for me, and the best way to explain this is cigarettes. Because with alcohol, people can say, what was your alcohol problem like? How much alcohol did you drink? Was you drinking 10 bottles of vodka a day? It starts to become a little bit of a who drank the most alcohol. But with cigarettes, when you're smoking 40 cigarettes a day, how many more cigarettes do you need to smoke a day to be, have a problem with cigarettes? So it's, I guess the only area of it that concerns me is when I see people really fall on the sword of the disease model, I guess, and start to believe that they're helpless. And rather than turn that into something positive, it ends up being negative because they feel like they've got no control. Ergo, what is the point of me dealing with this? A good example is my kid's sister is suffering from depression, right? There is nothing I can do to help my kid's sister suffer from depression because she is got the belief that it is genetic and that the reason that she is this way is because of my dad, and because it's genetic, there's nothing she can do about it, so she doesn't have to do anything about it. Now, I know that she obviously doesn't want to be depressed. I know that, but I also know that in order for her to get better, in inverted commas, she has to work her ass off, and she has to go down places in dark tunnels and caves that she don't want to go. And when someone says, hey, it's not your fault, it's your dad's fault, that makes life a lot easier, and that's the only thing that worries me a little bit.
Yeah. I really hear you. And I think sort of the bottom line is that you and I would probably both agree with this, that we want people to adopt whatever way of thinking about the problem motivates them and, and spurs them into productive action, into the solution. It's like get in the solution, live in the solution. You might be surprised how much of that there is in AA. I don't know how much experience you have in AA, but nobody in AA is sitting around contemplating the problem and thinking about how powerless they are. It's all about solution. Like what are you going to do about it? There's a good saying, you're not responsible for your disease, but you're responsible for your recovery. Get up, so yeah. I'm right there with you. Like I really, I'm a fan of surveying the landscape just long enough to see what the hell the issue is, and then let's get into action, straight up.
I'm a huge believer in the role that societal conditioning plays on our lives, not just in addiction, but I believe that we all have this imaginary hand shoved up our arse, and it's directing us in the world. That free will and choice has become almost a joke, that we're attacked left, right, and centre by, I think I was reading the other day, 5,000 advertisements a day. The alcohol industry spends more money than any other industry in the world on that advertising. And I really do believe that you were saying earlier on, Susan, that we're bombarded with things like pornography and alcohol and drugs at levels that our bodies are not like programmed to handle, you know, and it's coming at us so much that somewhere in our brain we just say to ourselves, fuck this, it is too much to worry about. I'm just going to do what that person does, or I'm just going to believe what this person says. Or if Lee Davies says he can quit drinking by reading Alan Carr book, I'm going to read the Alan Carr book and I'm going to quit drinking. If Susan says AA work for her, I'm going to go to AA. And I really believe that is what is happening a lot. You know, is we're so wrapped up with finding the solution that once we find it, we're not interested in anything else. I'm not interested in AA because I found my solution. You might not be interested in this because you found your solution, and it works. And I heard you say that the Bright Line eating product, you know, your training, your coaching, is the best weight loss program in the world. So why look anywhere else if it's, you know what I mean? There's nothing else better than the best in the world, right? You know?
Yeah, it's not for everybody though. So I do stand by. I do think that we have the best weight loss program in the world, but I also know that it's not for everybody. It takes a tremendous amount of willingness and readiness, and there's a rigor to it that's not a good fit for everybody. You know, something that, you know, just back to what you were saying, I want to talk about the susceptibility scale, because not all brains are equally susceptible to addiction. Mm-hmm. And you were talking about some guy I'd never heard of. I'm sure I should read his book or whatever, but he said that he would do heroin just to prove that it wasn't going to affect his brain or whatever. Yeah. The reality is that not every brain is susceptible to addiction. Research on humans and on rats shows that 1/3 are not susceptible, 1/3 are moderately susceptible, and 1/3 are highly susceptible. So he might have, and addiction is not in a substance. It's not the case that everyone who does heroin gets addicted. If you just look at people going home with opium prescriptions after back surgery, right? Like, I don't know what the name of for us it's Vicodin. I don't know what the name is for the substance that people are given after a surgery, right? For pain meds,
yeah, I know what you
right?
mean, yeah.
It's filled with heroin, essentially, right? They're taking heroin. And if it was a back surgery, they might be taking it for months, like plenty of time to get fully physiologically addicted. But when it's time to wean off, a lot of people have no problem with that. And then other people become pillheads, right? So it's not the case that everybody gets addicted. It's just not. Some people can dabble with cigarettes and never develop a 40 cigarette a day habit, right? Some people can drink a beer a day for their whole life and never develop a drinking problem. So it's actually important to recognize that some brains are especially susceptible. So I tend to work best with people who are on the higher end of the susceptibility scale, because they tend to have been put through the ringer with food and tend to submit themselves more readily to a bright line approach. I mean, I don't just tell people to give up sugar. I tell them to give up flour, and I tell them to eat 3 meals a day with nothing in between. And I tell them to weigh and measure their food. So it's a big ask what we do in my program, you know? And so it's not for everybody. A lot of people look at that and they're like, hell no, I'm not doing it.
I mean, what you say there is really important. I just want to cover something. Is when the Alan Carr, the name of the guy is Alan Carr, and I have no doubt that part of Alan Carr's methodology behind saying I would take heroin in order to give it up is partly to emphasize or to get across to the reader how strongly he believes in his own methodology, which ergo then reinforces the strength of that process to the reader. So I have no doubt he's thinking that. But Alan Carr does have an addictive brain, if that is such a thing, because he was hugely addicted to smoking cigarettes and alcohol. I think Maya Salovich covers this really, really well in her book on Broken Brain, where you'll have two people who both start drinking at the same time in their teenage years or whatever, but their lives will end up being very different, and their external factors and the environment and the trauma and all these different things they go through in their life will be hugely different. And so I guess I veer more towards that angle more than the two people were born with different brains, because I know neuroscience and I don't read about this kind of stuff because it baffles me. But my very simplistic view is our evolutionary process is pretty screwed up and pretty wrong, because there are so many people in the world addicted, which means what's happened with evolution, if it's a brain disease, because we all seem to have the same brain disease. Like I lived in a little small valley, Susan, 3,000 people, right? My definition of an alcoholic, okay, is somebody who cannot control their alcohol. In my sphere of influence, the hundreds of people I knew in that 3,000 strong valley, my sphere of influence, who I knew intimately very well, did not have control of their alcohol. I think it's inconceivable that the large majority of those 3,000 people were born with a brain disease that made them addicted to alcohol. I believe they were born into a small place where alcohol was deemed to be normal, you know? And so their environment was, hey, when you're 14, we're going to let you drink alcohol. And then over time, that just becomes your habit, and then the addiction takes over and you're screwed because now you can't get rid of it. But there will be some people who just drink and then they get it under control, and they only have a drink every now and then, you know, or you know what I mean? I just think it's hugely complicated. Hugely complicated.
It is complicated. It's and there are some studies that shed light on some of what you're talking about. So, for example, when you say, you know, evolution must have gone awry for so many people to have such addictable brains, if you want to think of it as a brain disease, actually, and evolution often works this way. There's a really helpful thing about being an addict, having an addictable brain, and that's why it evolved that way. The whole, you know, in an environment where there's no booze and there's no donuts, having a brain that works this way is actually an advantage. So let me explain how that is. This is research that was done on sign tracking and goal tracking rats. So they had these rats in a cage, and they did this experiment where they put a lever out into the cage, and a few seconds after the lever came out, food came out in the dish. And that happened every time the lever came out. A few seconds later, food would come out in the dish. And the rats picked up on this right away. But what shocked the researchers was that actually some rats, when the lever would come out, would run right over to the dish, which makes sense. They've learned that the food is coming. Some rats would run over to the lever and like nuzzle it and get all cozy with the lever as if they were in love with the lever. And later researchers actually did another study where the lever would come out, the food would come out a few seconds later, but only for a second, and then it would get sucked back up. So if the rats were still loving on the lever, they would actually miss the food. Their attraction to the lever would make them even miss the actual reward that their brains should have been focused on in the first place. These rats are called sign trackers, meaning they notice, they track, they become focused on the cue that predicts the reward. So these are the addictable rats. How does that make sense? Why does that matter? It turns out that in the process of developing an addiction, there are all these antecedents to getting the fix. There's the money in your hand on payday that allows you to go to the bar. There's the street that you walk down. There's the sign of the pub, right? There's the laughter outside of it. There's the familiar face. There's the clanking of the pool balls, the billiard balls in the back of all of those are cues that predict that you're about to get your reward, right? And for someone who has an addictable brain, those cues pull them in so powerfully that they almost can't even help themselves. They'll even miss the reward because they're so enamored with the cue. Now, if you're a smoker or an eater or a drinker, those cues can be all around you all the time, especially if you had a daily habit. It makes it a lot harder to quit when you're pulled in toward all the antecedents to getting your fix. Now, but if you think about evolutionarily, how helpful would it be to be hypersensitive to the cues that predict certain outcomes, to the rustle of the leaves that predicts that there's a rattlesnake in the bush, to the particular look of the sky that predicts that rain is coming, to the particular, you get what I'm saying, right? Like being hypersensitive to the antecedents of certain consequences is a benefit that evolved evolutionarily for our brains. So I hesitate to say that addiction is just some kind of messed up bastardization of evolution, because there's aspects to it that are helpful. Just in our current environment where we've produced these toxins and these drugs and we're peddling them as, as a good release, it becomes counterproductive to have a brain that works that way. It's the same way with obesity, right? Like obesity exists now because we have this glut of heavily processed calories around. Well, our brains didn't really evolve to handle obesity because there was a shortage of food for most of when we evolved. It was like excess food wasn't really the problem. So you can't really say, well, look, we're all obese, so that means we evolved wrong. It's like we just evolved under different circumstances.
I think the way I look at it is, if somebody close to me, if you met somebody close to me and said to them, what's this Lee Davey fella like, right? They'd say to you, and you said, has he got an addictive brain? They would say, yeah, Lee Davey has an addictive brain, right? There is a gambling addict, smoking addict, drug addict, alcoholic, pornography addict, sugar addict. You name it, I've been addicted to it. Here's the issue for me. I know. What did my friend say the other day? He said, you've given up life. Because I was telling him all the things I quit. And he was like, you've given up life. Oh. But the thing that I cannot get out of my head, and I like talking about it, and I think it would be really interesting for people to kind of listen to this as well, is I walk into a pub and a nightclub, and I get all those triggers. But there is no way on earth I am ever going to have a drink of alcohol, right? It's never, ever going to go there. I never want to drink alcohol. Yesterday, I was in the kitchen and I was dancing away, like I said, to the rave tunes, and my mind went to drugs. I'm never going to snort cocaine. But if you stick me in a house when there's cakes in the fridge, and I know they're in the fridge, right? Now I've got a problem on my hands. Okay, now I've got a problem on my hands. So that tells me that if that exists in my life, then the biological factor that you talked about, that having an addictive brain is beneficial to humans, I agree with that. That is obviously prevalent. But I also feel from my own experience that I have the ability to choose, however hard it is, and it is very hard, I have the ability to choose the way that I think about things, to change that, whatever's going on chemically. Because if that wasn't possible for me, I would be thinking about alcohol and cigarettes in exactly the same way I think about sugar. And like I said to you, I program myself like a robot. I brainwash myself to believe that alcohol and smoking offers zero value. But because I believe sugar holds value, i.e. it tastes nice, I desire it. But I can't desire the other things. So, I don't know, Susan, maybe the way that I've re-brainwashed myself, because I was brainwashed to drink, I know I was, so I counter-brainwashed myself, maybe that's changed something in my brain chemistry related to alcohol and cigarettes. I don't know,
I know you haven't mentioned the word switch, but a lot of addicts and alcoholics talk about there being this switch in the brain. And to my knowledge, we haven't figured out what that is on a neurological level. But I experience it all the time where a switch can flip and it puts me into a state of either, on the one hand, like you're describing, there's no way I'm picking up. Like, I don't care what you do to me. I'm not picking up. Versus, you can't keep me from using. Like I'm on a mission to go get some, and there's nothing you can do to stop me. And that switch is really pronounced in my brain, and I can be in the state of like abstinence is easy. I'm neutral. I'm not picking up. You can't phase me. You can't convince me. You can't entice me. I'm good to go. And this other mode of being where I'm kind of I'm on a mission to go get some, or I'm shaky. Like, if there are cakes in the fridge, I'm gonna have a problem. You know what I mean? I'm curious, are you thinking, Lee, about sugar and about how you, like, what kind of Jedi mind tricks you could use on yourself to get into a state where you don't want to eat sugar anymore?
I will answer that in a second, but just on the switch, that switch exists for me when it comes to sexual thoughts, when it comes to sugar, and to a certain extent gambling, although I'm not in situations where I can gamble. But that switch is definitely there for those things. Just to let you know. But what am I thinking with sugar? Yes, I am always, I know within my mind quite clearly that the reason that I keep wanting to, not so much, I know it sounds, I believe in something called the vow, okay, whereby there comes a point when someone says, I don't know what's happened, but something is different now. Like, I am not going to use now. That has happened to me in sugar. There is no turning back. I have completely, one of the things I really liked that you said on the James Healy podcast that really come home to me, really helped me, was you said, I don't want my clients, or the people you work with, to use sugar substitutes, right?
Right.
And that really hit home to me because I realized I was using sugar substitutes, and I found that was not helping me to divorce myself as far away from this belief that sugar is nice as I can. If I don't eat sugar for a huge, long period of time, and it's just not, and I've got myself in the mindset of just saying, no, I don't eat sugar, then that thought that it's really nice kind of dissipates. But if I have a cheesecake with dates in it, that connection to sugar is too strong for me, and that enables me to one day relapse. And like anybody else, when I relapse, the fuck it attitude comes in, and I don't eat like 10 boxes of donuts in a day. My fuck it attitude is, over the next month I will have sugar 4 times. That's when I've lost the plot, that's where I am with sugar, and I'm interested in your thoughts on that. Really interested in that.
Well, just for one thing, dates are sugar in my mind. Fructose. If you just, my light just popped out. Hold on real quick. I'm going to turn back on my. So I think of like orange juice as the same as a can of soda pop, it's really, it's the same thing. So, and really artificial sweeteners, are too, it's the same stuff. So, it's noteworthy to me how mild your binges are, four pieces of cheesecake in a month isn't, I go a little further than that when I say what the fuck I'm eating, I'm eating more than that. But food really, I think in my life, if you look at my whole life, food has been my drug of choice for sure. So it's my biggest issue. Anyway.
Well, let's talk about your program then, because everything we've talked about up to this point has been about 2 different views of how knowledge and understanding can help people quit alcohol or other addictions. And you did say in the Bright Line Eating that in your view of, in your research and your studies, that it is the best weight loss program in the world. However, you also said that it's not for everyone, right?
Yep.
Which is kind of like encapsulates what we were talking about. AA is not for everyone. the brain disease methodology isn't for everyone, and the Lee Davies school of thought that we all can control our choices isn't for everyone, you know? So in your research, why does bright line eating work for some people? What is the method here? Because I read on your website that in 2003, I think it was, someone taught you a method in inverted commas, but you never revealed what it was. So I'm interested in that. And then why do people struggle with it? And I know you touched on this a little bit earlier on, but let's put more meat around that if possible.
Yeah, sure, totally. So the bright line eating program comes. It's an amalgam of a bunch of things, sort of, methods and systems and research and knowledge that I've pieced together from mainly two places. One is a 12-step program for food addiction. So that person in 2003 was a member of a 12-step program for food addiction. And I'd already been in 12-step programs for food. I don't know if you know, Lee, there's like 8 of them, at least.
Do you know, I didn't know. I knew they had them for like everything else you could think of, but I didn't know they had them for food until I read your website.
Yeah, they do. They have them for food, but there's a lot of different ones for food because it's not as clear with food what you're trying to give up, right? You have to eat, obviously.
Yeah.
And so, there's only one program for alcohol because you're just giving up alcohol, clear, right? There's one program for nicotine. There's a few programs for drugs, but they're all for like different drugs. There's Narcotics Anonymous, Cocaine Anonymous, Marijuana Anonymous. But with food, historically, I think the first 12-step program for food started in the 1960s, early 1960s. It was Overeaters Anonymous. And within that program, different factions of people started to think about what they were doing with food differently. Some people were like, look, you got to let go of sugar. And other people were like, only white sugar. And other people were like, you got to let go of flour too. And other people were like, only white flour. And other people were like, no, it's wheat that's the problem. And other people were like, well, you got to weigh and measure your food on a scale. And other people were like, no, just eat a moderate sized meal. And so where the boundaries should be with food was a really hotly contested issue. Overeaters Anonymous decided to not take any stand and let people figure out their own food plan. But what ended up happening is, to be frank, and this is just from what I've seen, I haven't seen that much success in Overeaters Anonymous. The whole figure it out for yourself, decide where your bright lines are going to be, often doesn't work because the addict brain is manipulative. And it's like, well, all right, then I'll keep eating the cheesecake with dates. You know what I mean? We'll keep gaming those angles. And with food, there's a lot of angles you can game, right? There's a lot of ways that you can kind of, you don't look like you've ever had a weight problem, but when you start to put a really persistent weight problem in the mix, the brain is going to fight you on losing weight. It wants to keep that weight on.
I've never had a weight problem. However, as soon as I stopped eating sugar, as soon as I stopped drinking alcohol, I lost weight. I think everybody does, right? But when I stopped eating sugar, I lost 2 stone. So I was 12 stone, went to 10 stone. But, and for people listening to this, I'm sure you'll have a lot to say about this as well. My son, he's 16 now, and he'll take his top off, Susan, and he'll do all this, and he'll say to me, well, when I talk about his dietary habits, he'll say, what's wrong with my diet then? And I'll say, no, it's not outside that counts. It's what's inside that counts. And although I didn't have a weight problem, my gut flora is like a trash can. And I've currently got a hypothyroid issue that is tracked all the way back to my poor dietary habits, overconsumption of sugar and overconsumption of alcohol. So it's internal as well as external, isn't it?
Yeah, it totally is. It totally is. So anyway, just to fast forward here, because I know that we've been already on this podcast for a long, long time, but I don't want to hijack your listeners. But so basically, Overeaters Anonymous splintered off, and there's at least 8 solid 12-step programs for food with significant membership now. There's probably more that I'm not aware of. And they advocate for their different ways of eating. And I finally met someone in one of those programs that, had a way of setting up the boundaries around food that ended up working for me. And I ended up being in that program for like 11 years. So that's how I lost my excess weight. During that time, I helped lots of people in that program. We all did, sponsoring people and leading meetings. And I started the fellowship in Sydney, Australia, because I moved to Sydney during that time. And there weren't any, meetings there. So I started meetings and so forth. And during that time, that's when I finished my PhD in brain and cognitive sciences. I did my postdoc in psychology, and I became a psychology professor. And I started teaching a college course on the psychology of eating. So at that time, eventually, I think collectively, I'm not in any 12-step food programs anymore, but I think collectively I spent 20 years in a variety of different ones, watching thousands of people try different ways of configuring the boundaries around food, the bright lines of what you're going to eat, what you're not going to eat, how you're going to manage your meals, how you're going to manage your snacks, how you're going to manage your, are you going to eat peanut butter? Are you going to, allow yourself an apple if you're hungry at 11 o'clock at night before bed, like all the different ways that you can configure it. And I started to study the brain and then also psychology. So brain and cognitive sciences is an interdisciplinary field. So my PhD and my undergrad degree, they're both in cognitive science, involved sort of an amalgam of lots of different ways of looking at the brain and the mind and human behavior. So I had a lot of disparate theories that I could pull from in constructing my ideas around what was really going on, what was underlying why certain methods of eating seemed to work for communities of people and certain methods didn't work. So I developed Bright Line Eating to explain the science behind why certain food choices work and certain food choices don't for people who have a certain kind of brain. And a lot of the basic structures do come from that 12-step program. I for a long time was just going to work within that 12-step program to help people join that 12-step program. But what I realized, Lee, is that really not everyone wants a 12-step program. A lot of people want a solution that's not either they're atheist and they don't want the whole God thing in there, or they don't want to go to meetings, or they don't have a brain that's really, they're not a food addict. They just want to lose weight. That's the other thing, is that, a 12-step program for food addiction is really only helpful if you really believe you're a food addict. But something like 90% of our overweight or obese population, they don't believe they're food addicts. And the research actually proves them, many of them are not. Some of them are, and they just don't think they are. But many of them are not. They just have a weight problem. So those people deserve a weight loss program that works as well. So anyway, that's where it all came from.
How are you for time, Susan?
Maybe 5 or 10 more minutes.
5 or 10 more minutes. You talked about boundaries. You said, going back to 2003, you said that the person who you met in the 12-step program really helped you understand boundaries around food. Can you touch on that a little bit more?
Yeah, they didn't talk about bright lines. This is now my terminology, but they told me not to eat sugar, not to eat flour, to eat only meals, not snacking or grazing, even if it was healthy food. I wasn't supposed to eat in between meals, and then to weigh and measure my food with a digital food scale. Now, I believe, improved on their bright line for sugar because they allowed artificial sweeteners, which I think is a big mistake, and the brain science is pretty clear on that. So I cleaned up that aspect of that bright line for sugar. It includes in Bright Line Eating no artificial sweeteners as well. But other than that, they helped me see where no sugar, no flour, eating only 3 meals a day, and bounding my quantities of food with a digital food scale. Those are the now I call them bright lines, 4 bright lines: sugar, flour, meals, and quantities. It
was interesting. Alan Carr, who we were talking about earlier on with the smoking and the drinking book, he also wrote a book called How to Lose Weight. And I read it just out of pure curiosity to see what he'd be going on about. And his main point was we're only designed to eat as much to satiate our hunger, and then that's it. And a lot of the problems we have as humans is we don't stop eating. We go beyond that point. He was saying you don't often see fat wild animals. They stop eating when they're done.
Well, they're also not eating donuts, and so when you read my book, when it comes out, I explain how the foods we've been eating have been rewiring the brain so it's no longer giving us the appropriate signal to stop eating. Yeah. Yes, it's true. That signal is supposed to come. It's not coming for a lot of people. There's a reason in the brain why people are finishing a full dinner and then sitting on the couch with a bag of crisps or chips, what you like to call it, and then they're going to the freezer for a pint of ice cream. They're not hungry. And their body doesn't need any more fuel, but their brains are malfunctioning.
And this is why our pets are fat. And the wild animals aren't fat, because we're feeding the pets all this crap that's got all the sugar and salt and God knows what else. And I guess there is it the hormone ghrelin? Is that the right hormone that plays around with your hunger?
Yeah, and leptin.
Hmm.
Ghrelin and leptin are the two biggies. And insulin is in the mix too, because insulin is blocking leptin. So, yeah.
Okay, two questions before I let you go then. Food is a natural resource, right? I mean, one of the ways that I try to combat my issues, if I'm being honest with you, is to stop thinking of food as a treat and to think of food as fuel, right? That's the way that I try to look upon it. Right, I'm like a car. I need to fuel myself now. Not, oh, I need a treat. What can I eat this night? It's the way that I try and do things. How do you help people who look at your program and think, wow, this is going to be too difficult?
Hmm. Yeah, that's a great question. One of the big things that I reassure them is that it's one day at a time.
Hmm.
That's a big 12-step slogan, but we don't have to think about whether we're going to do this forever because we might not. You know what I
Hmm.
mean? Like, who knows what we're going to choose to do in a month or a year, right? Let's just decide what we want to do today. If
Yeah.
what we've been doing hasn't been working, let's do it one day at a time. So that's the first thing. And then the second thing is I remind people that the dopamine depletion in the brain, that down regulation that we were talking about earlier, it causes a feeling of bleakness when you don't have access to your drug. And those receptors regenerate. So that feeling of bleakness when you think if I can't have sugar or flour, it just feels like the world is like, really, where's my pleasure going to come from? The world feels really bleak if I take out those foods. That feeling goes away. It really does. And it doesn't even take that long. So I also tell people that their brain will start to get back on board and it's not going to be that bad. And I also tell them I love my food. Like I eat delicious, amazing food. And I still get a lot of pleasure from my food. This isn't a program of eating drab food that is cardboard and that you hate. There's still plenty of delicious food out there when you take
Yeah.
out sugar and flour. So those are some of the things that I say.
I'm on a very, very strict diet at the moment because of my hypothyroid. And yesterday I blanched some spinach. I had sesame seeds, sesame oil, garlic, and boom, that was a dish. And it it is literally just exploring and keeping an open mind and trying different things. A question for you: you said there that the reaction of the dopamine receptors once you've given up something is going to make you feel a little bit down and dreary, but it changes over time and it's not, you just basically wait it out type of thing and you'll be okay. Can you also teach people to fill that space with other things that are positive that can satiate those dopamine receptors?
Yes and no. So yeah, I do invite people to really consider what true comfort looks for. I think a lot of people look for comfort in food.
Mm.
And there's a lot of other things that are comforting, taking a bath or talking with a friend or curling up in bed reading a book or, think about what's really comforting for you. Um, I do caution people to be careful not to switch addictions. If they start to do something else that's going to flood the brain with dopamine, it won't heal. And you'll be back to having sugar cravings before you know it. You'll do shopping or gambling or whatever for a little while, but the result of that is that your brain will never heal. So, and then a week late, 3 weeks later, you'll be craving ice cream again, and you'll be wondering what happened. And it's because, well, in the meantime, you've been doing all this shopping and gambling. So, I do think that finding other ways to to fill the void basically that's left by food and also to grieve it. It's sad to give. I mean, really, it is sad that we've had to give up these things. And I think there's some appropriateness in recognizing, I had a lot of fun when I drank for quite a long time. And there's parts of me that are sad for the loss of letting certain aspects of that life go, and I enjoyed those foods. They are delicious. And they're, so I see kind of, for me, I see the benefit. I see both sides, including the benefits to all the things that I used to do. They all served me in a certain way. And, on balance, I'm much better off without them now. But creating space for that grief is healthy.
Okay, and final question. It seems to be a huge number of people, virtually everybody I come across, stops drinking and then immediately starts putting on weight because they're eating sugar. And with more and more information, more and more great books like Robert Lustig's Fat Chance, showing that when it comes to deaths around the world, that sugar is causing more deaths and more financial ruin to our governments than any other kind of product out there. What would your nutshell advice be? And we will get back together again when I've read the book and purely talk about the book. What would your nutshell advice be to people who are just at the wit's end right now because they can't stop eating sugar?
Well, for someone who's really at their wit's end, I would say don't underestimate the magnitude of the problem you're facing, because quitting sugar is one thing, but really like getting it out of your system, not going back, and then losing all your excess weight and living happy, thin and free. It requires an intense rearrangement of your entire identity. And so I would say head over to brightlineeating.com and join our community, because it takes support. You're going to need to be with other people that don't eat sugar and that live this way of life, because our society is still set up, unfortunately, as a bunch of pushers. People are going to push sugar on you, and it makes it, and it's everywhere. It's going to make it hard. So arm yourself with a community and with support.
That's a huge point. People will push sugar on you and ridicule you for not having sugar more than any other of the substances or behaviors we talked about earlier on. It's ridiculous.
I think at New Year's Eve, if you say no, thank you, I'm not going to drink champagne. It's New Year's Eve, but I don't drink. People will respect that. Yeah. But on a special holiday, if the pie or the cake is going around and you say no, thanks, I don't eat sugar, people will try to talk you into having some, because it's a special occasion. The
other thing I noticed as well, Susan, I don't know if you ever got this, is once you stop one addiction and then another addiction and another addiction, it's almost like people's patience wears thin. They start saying things, you're like, oh my God, what are you giving up next? It's like they're really angry with you. And I always tell people, just get those people out of your life. Go to Bright Line Eating and meet people who want you to be who you are, and love you for who you are and celebrate you and all those things. Susan, just want to end with a little bit of gratitude, okay? I want to say thank you for running over time. I'm sorry about that. So I just want to say thank you for giving up your time. I know time is the most precious thing in the world, and I really appreciate that. I want to say gratitude for engaging in a debate about and talking about and listening to me talk about ideas and concepts and processes that run counter to the way you think about things. I don't think there's enough debate that goes on, because debate is uncomfortable, and I really want to thank you for taking part in that. I really believe that the people listening will get a hell of a lot more out of listening to two people talking about two different ways of thinking about addiction than hearing the same message all the time. I really do. And I want to thank you for turning your life around in the last 13 years, and instead of just getting on with your life and earning loads of money and buying loads of materialistic things and all that kind of stuff, you've really reinvested your time and effort into creating Bright Line Eating, the Psychology of Eating and Body Image course, and your new book that's coming out in March. And thank you for that, because there cannot be enough Susan Peirce Thompson. So thanks for your time.
Oh, thanks, Lee. It's been really nice to be here with you. I've really enjoyed our discussion.
Thank you. We'll come back and do it in March. Is your book out in March?
Yeah, March 21st in America. I don't know if it's coming out in England then, but it might be.
I'll get hold of a copy, have a good read of it, and then we'll get back on and have a chat about it.
Would love that, Lee. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Take